This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
Coffee-fueled stories. Hello. It's me, Michelle, your pocket DJ and host of Coffee Fueled Stories, a show where storytelling and coffee hang out. This week's special guest is TJ Butler. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hey there. Thank you so much for having me.
We are talking about your debut book, Dating Silky Maxwell.
So my book is Dating Silky Maxwell. This is a gritty short story collection for badass people who've seen some stuff and lived to tell about it. So if that is you in any way, I wrote these stories for you.
So I'm going to quote you here, owning their shit.
I mean, so everybody in the book comes from some sort of disadvantaged background, whether that is a fraught family or you have something happen in your adult life or you made some poor decisions as a young adult when you should have known better. And everybody is kind of living with those things, but everybody is in a situation where they have to make a choice and they choose what allows them to sometimes take the money and run. It allows them to, some of them still know where the bodies are buried and will keep it that way. So it's really about basically women's choices and women's agency and, people having agency and having a voice. People who might have lived lives where they didn't have agency and a voice at other times.
I believe this I pulled this from the internet, so I did a little bit of research as well. And I really like this description. Stories of survival and transformation. Women who leave their past behind and reinvent themselves until their mistakes no longer define them.
That is correct. I spent my teenage years in foster care. My mother chose an abusive alcoholic boyfriend over me. The state told her I couldn't live with him. And so she put me in social services custody at 13, and I aged out of foster care. So if you can imagine what an angry 18-year-old gets up to with no family support, that was me. And so I wrote this. There's many fictionalized memoir bits in here. But when I say that, I think about my future readers, and I have to tell you, the one where she chops up a man and feeds him to the hogs, that is not a memoir piece. But everybody really owns their shit, meaning that, the mistakes you made, nobody runs from them. Those things are part of them. And just like the traumas and the things in our lives that have either flattened us or baggage that we carry around into our normal adult lives and go to work with these things, these women have an opportunity to kind of define their identities in spite of those things that they've lived through.
I think in these short stories, there is someone, for example, I wanted to be that badass. I wanted to be able to be like, yeah, I can do this. I can defend myself. So there are just certain women in these stories that I'm like, if I'm going to be a badass, I want to be like that.
So when I tell people, okay, I never chopped up a man and fed him to the hogs, I also often say, I never burned down a dive bar with Jamaican overproof rum. So most of my characters in my stories are not running around doing these superhuman feats of badassery. They're walking around like we are. For example, in Black Dog, a crazy, weird faux preacher is, he's delusional about her dog being a force of evil. And he comes to her house, and the dog clearly knows that his owner is being threatened. And when she sees that this guy is about to maybe hurt her dog, possibly kill her dog, she shoots him. She is not the kind of person that just walks around shooting people. And so then she realizes, oh my gosh, like WTF, I have a body here. And what do you do when you have a body? She's, she wasn't defending herself. She's defending her dog. And, unless you get a really dog friendly court, you're in trouble. And what is she going to do? She's got to save the farm, so she's got hogs and it's dinner time. And then In a Flame on the Ocean. So that story, do you know that old song, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, What a Good Wife You'd Make?
Yes.
So I was driving home and late night from a writing workshop, and I heard that song and I was in the writer mode. And I thought, this is a story. This song is telling a story. And so I thought about, who is Brandy and what does she do when she's not serving whiskey and wine? So I created this entire life for her. And the thing about her is that she's got this bar, she's inherited a bar. And to translate that into regular people who probably don't own a dive bar, she is stuck and she's jilted, but she kind of realizes that the relationship wasn't what she thought it was. And so she wallows in bed for a couple days before she's like, wait a minute, I have to get up and I can't just live my life moping. And I'm pretty much stuck here in this situation. And so many of us have found ourselves stuck, but mostly we just go back to work, and it takes some real strength to identify that you're pretty much stuck and there's nothing to do. But what do you do? So she goes downstairs. She throws her liquor all over the place. And I had to call the fire department to find out exactly what kind of liquor you can use for arson. And I had to identify myself as a writer, and the guy took down my information. So I found out, and I used the right kind of liquor, which is Jamaican overproof rum, in case anybody needs to know that, but don't get back to me about it. And so she burns her bar down because she knows that if she goes off on a road trip to find herself or whatever, she's going to come back because it's safe. And it's the easy thing to come back and do what you've been doing and do what you know. But burning the bar down and driving away is the scary thing. It's the hard thing, but that's what's going to free her from this anchor that she has around her neck, which is being jilted and just being stuck. And most of us, so few women leave our lives. Many women have children. We have these responsibilities, women of a certain age. We have these things in our life that we say, oh, I can't walk away from such and such. But so many of us just dream of getting in the car or packing a bag and just getting on, the westbound highway or something like that. And so the women in my stories do these things, and not everybody escapes, but people in these stories, they do the hard thing. And I've allowed them to just, live out these things that are hard for us to do. Or there's another one where a woman defeats a sexual predator by slamming her fist into a yellow jacket's nest. Yes. And she knows full well that she's going to get stung. But, if you're in the middle of an assault, so many of us, there's, freeze, flight, or fight. And we don't know what we're going to do until we are faced with that. And when you're faced with that, you don't have time to think about it. You just do whatever it is that your brain and your body are predisposed for without your permission. And she was not the kind of person probably to do that, but there she is faced with this and realizing in a snap moment that this is her only way out. And so she would be, no, I wouldn't say she was a killer, but, she needed to get out of the situation. And I don't think she would have been able to do that by physically overpowering this man that was trying to get her.
And I believe that was the first story. I was filled with a lot of anxiety, as a woman, right? Like, I'm little, I'm not big, I'm not physically strong. And so, right. And so I'm reading the story and I was like in that moment and I was just like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, what's going to happen? Where are we going with this story? And before I forget, I wanted to say your prose is poetic. Your pacing was so perfect as well. So it was the prose and the pacing and the way that it takes you into the story, that it wasn't overbearing. And so the stories just had like this real awesome flow. And I kind of felt like it was like waves, like, how like when you're standing on the shore, and so the waves just kind of lap at you and there's just this perfect timing. And it's so weird because that's how I felt your writing was. It had like this nice ebb and flow of words, of your language. It was awesome.
Thank you so much. Let me say one thing. So that story we were just talking about, there is going to be a sexual assault. And so but there's not. And the scene, it is handled in a way, as far as trigger warnings go, it's handled in a way that she becomes the stronger person very quickly. And so I've said when talking about my book, oh, it's got all the trigger warnings, but the trigger warnings I've done them in a way that the things that trigger people, because the women fight back and because the women own these things and take control and get a voice when they didn't have one before, I think that, for my triggers, I wrote this to change the trauma narrative. Many of my situations, I was powerless. And I found that it was really awesome to write a book, including situations where I was powerless. And so many of us have been powerless in, a zillion situations, and give these women power. And so that kind of harnesses the trauma narrative in so many triggers, and people come out okay.
Yes. What's kind of interesting is, we've all had our own different types of trauma, and we've all been in situations where we have, possibly feared for our lives. And what I think is interesting is we don't realize we have the power to change the narrative, or that we've had the power all along until you're in that situation. And that's the craziest thing about the psyche, the human nature, about humans in general, the brain. And it's like, you think, oh yeah, I know what I would do in that situation, but you're absolutely, you don't know. Sorry.
Our traumas, the long past traumas that we have, that we're walking around with, and also traumas today, those things are, when we experience them, we're bringing to the table everything that we have held on to for our lives. And that is how we handle the traumas.
Absolutely. We don't have handbooks, right? Like you buy a car and you get a handbook and it tells you this, okay, at 20,000 miles, this is what you do. At 30,000 miles, this is what you do. But we don't have handbooks like that. We can learn and we can try and we can do meditation. We can learn yoga. We can eat right. We can do all of these things, right? There's lots of tools, but we don't come with handbooks,
It's interesting that you use yoga and meditation. So I have spent a lot of time not being okay in my head, and I don't have any diagnosed mental illness, but I have had a lot of times where I wasn't okay. And all of the conventional wisdom says aromatherapy, use lavender, do meditation, do yoga, get yourself centered. And so for example, when I smell lavender, it makes me anxious. And when I do meditation, and especially yoga, I just hate every minute of it because I have turned to these things in my darkest hours, and I've never turned to them when nothing's wrong. Because if nothing's wrong, you don't need to just take up yoga. And so I think that, I'm 49. I think that at this point in my life, I'm not going to be a yoga person because of how traumatic things are when I turn to yoga.
Totally.
But, for other people, I think those things help, just not for me.
Totally. It took me a long time before I accepted yoga. I was in a good headspace when I was into yoga. So I hear you on that. And in regard to lavender makes me ill. Like I am anytime I smell lavender, I'm like, ew. And I know, sorry, listeners, if you're into lavender, I apologize. This is not directed at you. This is me. So I have this little candle right here. It is a vanilla pumpkin candle.
Oh, sounds delicious.
So this is how I reset myself. So if I'm feeling anxious, if I'm nervous, and it's right here on my desk, I try to have, so I have stress relief, eucalyptus, spearmint. So for me, stress relief, not lavender, mint. I go for mint or lemon, citrus, something like that, because lavender to me is just foul. Like I do not want my clothes to smell like lavender. I want to smell like sandalwood or vanilla. I don't know, maybe food. Apparently I want to smell like food.
I stopped wearing any scent at all when I got my dog because I didn't want to confuse her. I'm just not a scented person now. But yeah, I used to wear perfumes and have scents around. Like I don't even use scented lotion because when she's sniffing my hands, I don't want her to I don't want her to wonder what it is. So I'm one of those dog moms, I guess.
At least you shower and you're clean. So, that's you don't have to smell like food. It's funny. I didn't even realize. I was like, oh wow, I actually do like vanilla and pumpkin and stuff like that. And I was like, apparently I do want to smell like food. But okay. So I have some questions. Diane Arbus, you actually referenced Diane Arbus in one of your stories. And I wanted to ask you, do you have a favorite? Did you mention her because she is one of your favorites, or do you have a favorite photographer because your photography is amazing, which we're going to get into that as well.
So I like that I am not anywhere near her and I don't shoot the same thing, right. But she went out into the world just looking for what the world kind of put in front of her. And she wasn't looking for beautiful things to make beautiful on the page or in the photos. She was just looking for what was there. And I think so I looked up the word gritty because if I'm going to call myself gritty, and it was basically like hard reality, and her photos are really hard reality.
Yes.
This is, we can fill our lives with beauty, and that's really awesome to do, to make the things that surround us pleasant to be around. But when you go out into the world and you leave kind of the bubble that you have made for yourself, and this is not bad. This is maybe, shopping at your favorite grocery store and buying shampoo that you like and wearing clothes that are comfortable, or whatever it is that you do that, makes you feel good. When you step outside that and you start noticing, and many people probably are doing that now, noticing that, there are things in the world that are not aesthetically pleasing, and aesthetic has become this word that you see on TikTok. But if you take before TikTok to just what pleases the eye and what pleases your senses, her photography was not what pleases anything. It's just real people. And I think that she may have gone places to find that specifically, but she wasn't doing that in her daily life. She wasn't, on this long road trip to creepy places. She was just out in the world. And the photos that I described, I don't actually know if those are her photos, but I got the feeling of her photos. The woman in the house dress and the man, I can't remember what he was doing, but she's got these photos of just real life.
Have you noticed how Coffee Fueled Stories doesn't have any ads? That's because I work tirelessly to keep this show alive. After 3 years on my own, I've decided I need to ask for your help. I've never asked anyone to subscribe. I've never asked anyone to leave a review. I've never asked anyone to rate the show. And I've never asked anyone to pay to listen. There are a few ways you can help support the show. I've created a Patreon page, Coffee Fueled Stories, and a subscription section on my podcast website. It's simple to support and help me keep my dream alive. Just click the link in the show notes to set up your paid subscription option. It's that easy. Thank you for your support.
Raw is kind of like the word that like pops into my head when I think about Diane Arbus. But I did appreciate how you described it in the book, and especially because you are a photographer and your photos are gritty, but they're beautiful. They're so serene, but yet there's a rawness to them as well. And it sounds like that's kind of like a contradiction, but it's like you said, it can be both. Things can be both aesthetically pleasing and uneasy at the same time, right?
Oh, I totally agree. So I started, this is crazy to admit, I started doing photography Valentine's Day 2023. So being an author, I've got to do all these author things. And somebody told me I had to get on Instagram. And I'd always liked taking pictures, but it was just like everybody likes taking pictures. And so I thought, oh, I don't have anything to put on Instagram. Let me just walk around. And so where I spend a lot of time at work is a kind of mixed use industrial, and the area around it is we're nowhere near manicured lawns. And so walking around with my dog, like around train tracks, and there's a factory, and there's a road where tractor trailers park. And so I started taking pictures, and then I thought, oh, I should just see what Google can do. And so I was editing them in the free Google software. But once I had accumulated a body of work, I realized that it goes with the kind of things that I write, like the world that my writing lives in. And I realized that I really didn't know the world that I was living in inside my head until it started coming out in photography. So the images are lonely, and they kind of look like there's no people around, and they're just, gritty. And I've driven on road trips, not like long road trips, maybe like a couple hours, or I've got a couple of places not terribly far away that I can go to. There's a strip of road that is just full of old motels. And so I have driven there and stopped and gotten out and taken pictures of, not of people, but of just the motor courts and old drive-through liquor stores. And it's interesting that looking at my photos, it's kind of a glimpse inside my head that is lonely and forgotten. I pass abandoned houses and I will take a picture of a cool abandoned house, but that's not really what I'm after. I'm just after things that you might see if you go to a certain part of your city. And so I like to find things. My husband and I own a production studio, and we have 3 studio spaces where photographers rent space from us and do photo shoots. And I have access to everything that you would need to do a fully professional photo shoot. But the thing I don't like about that for myself is I don't want to create a scene and photograph it everything that I've photographed, I moved one little ticket I found on the ground for an amusement park with my toe to kind of angle it so it wasn't parallel to the boardwalk. But everything else I have just stopped in the middle of the sidewalk or, pulled over and got out and photographed these things. I'm in love with how the forces of the universe have put things together. And that could be what humans have left, dropped, and driven away. The wind has blown something. Time has aged paint on a sign. It's these things that have come together through all the forces of nature and creation and whatever else you want to call it. And I've just found them. And another thing that's super fun for me is that I shoot only with my phone. And I have a really good phone. I purchased a better phone because it had a really good camera. But the thing is that if you take a camera out into the world, you become a photographer. And if you are taking pictures with your big camera, somebody can look at you and wonder what you're doing and maybe say, oh, I'm sorry, no pictures allowed here. Or they just look at you and know that you're photographing something. Whereas if you pull your phone out of your back pocket, you're just some random person with a phone. And it's so many people take pictures with their phone that nobody would bat an eyelash at you, standing somewhere just snapping pictures. So it's really the experience for me of going out on a hunt, driving, down a road where there might be like a bingo hall and like an equal number of churches and bars and a methadone clinic on one end of town, and finding those kind of places and shooting random things. I don't often shoot people because the images that I depict are raw and gritty and lonely and forgotten. And I don't want to put a person in that scene because I'm going for a certain look. And I think that it's not my job to say, oh, here's this guy and he fits into this scene. So I don't shoot people.
I love that. If you're just shooting what you see, to me in my mind, that gives me so much less anxiety. Like you just see it and you're like, oh, hey, that looks cool, or I really like how that looks, and boom, it's done. You're in and out. But if you have I would never want to be a photographer for a wedding. Like that to me.
Oh my gosh, no.
The anxiety, I don't know how these people do it, and I have mad respect for them. So kudos to anybody who is a wedding photographer. You have a special place in my heart. So now, do you still live on a sailboat, or did you just live on a sailboat for a short amount of time?
So we are back and forth between the sailboat and the tiny house. Right now, with winter coming, the sailboat gets wrapped and it gets really cozy. But we are mostly just back and forth with owning a business. So often we work really late hours, and home sailboat is like 40 minutes away. And during rush hour traffic, sometimes it can take over an hour. And that's not a terrible commute in my eyes. But if I'm working pretty late and then I have to open up in the morning, sometimes we just stay. We have an apartment, like a studio apartment, and it's comfortable, but it's not home. The sailboat is home. And so a lot of people, people ask like, isn't it cold? And then they want to know where we shower. The sailboat is home, so we heat it and we shower there. And getting water in the winter involves hundreds of feet of hose. So we are a little more conservative with the long showers. But sailboat life is, it's just like home. It's like living in a tiny house, and everything is, compact, and you can't have a ton of stuff. But between my business and my tiny house and my sailboat, I have everything I need. For example, I don't have lamps anymore. I have all my apartment stuff in storage, but I don't have lamps and throw rugs, and we don't have art on the walls. So normal house stuff is packed away. But we have everything for cooking and clothing and desks for computers. So it's a little bit of an unconventional living situation, but the nice thing is that we don't pay rent. We don't have a mortgage. I mean, aside from what we're paying for, our sailboat to be at a marina, but anybody who has a sailboat has to pay that. And so it's a little bit of an unconventional lifestyle, but it allows us a little bit of freedom that, having a mortgage wouldn't allow us. And we're saving up for property. We're looking at property somewhere that's vacation-ish, whether that's mountains or somewhere on the coast. And that will just be, for us now, kind of another place to get away while we are, still young and working.
I think living on a sailboat is like the coolest thing. I've actually always admired, and what's crazy is I was in the Air Force, but I've always loved and admired the sailor way. And what I mean by that is you have a very small space with which to maximize your life, right? My favorite sayings are always sailor sayings. Again, even though I was in the Air Force, like smooth seas never made a good sailor. That to me just resonates. What I think is interesting is sailor superstitions, scrimshaw. So do you guys scrimshaw? And not necessarily on bones. That's not where ivory is. Like I scrimshawed in school on a bar of soap.
So the sailory things that I was doing when we first moved aboard and my husband started crewing on other boats to sail around the world. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this whole sailor thing. I started working with rope and doing different sort of splicing. But then I realized I just wanted to write. And I just, so the sailing, the live aboard culture, so many of those people are retired in our area because we're kind of near DC, and who can afford to move onto a boat? It is mostly because we're not really nautical. I mean, there's Annapolis, which is a really big sailing capital.
Yeah.
But most of the people at our marina they were in their, retirement age, and they would spend summers in the mid-Atlantic. And then after hurricane season in November, everybody heads south. And so I wasn't necessarily around, a lot of people our age. And the people that were living aboard they were going to work. They weren't really out, with dreadlocks and bare feet, and, people just were going to work. So I wasn't really doing a lot of like the sailor stuff that you see when you watch a YouTube couple who's, tan and they're just out in these locations, and we weren't doing that stuff. As far as the stuff goes, so I grew up in a family that really valued stuff, and I grew up under the shadow of this will, and I didn't know whose will it was, but everybody was going to get something in the will. And so I had space in an apartment, and I accumulated, seasonal changes for my bathroom with the bath mat and the shower curtain. And I had, all of these things for entertaining, and I had pictures that I could rotate on the walls. And so taking the leap to move onto a sailboat was really scary. But, I'd always heard this BS about downsizing where people say it's freeing. And I'm like, no, they just do not have good stuff. But, but once I started like unloading my stuff on Facebook Marketplace and donating So in the principles of like sailboat life and tiny space living, you can't entertain 12 people. So you don't need 12 place settings of dishes and plates.
Yeah.
And, I pared it down, and, you get books on Kindle, and it killed me, especially now with Zoom, where everybody's in front of their bookshelf of validation. And I'm like, look how much is on my Kindle. Sorry, you can't see it. I've got them too. But it was really freeing to part with stuff. And, many people in my family have these houses full of fancy things, houses full of expensive things, and they're kind of tied to them. But there's nothing wrong with that, because those people they just don't want the lifestyle that I want. And living, with my stuff, I never thought of as an anchor. I just thought, oh, you have seasonal linens, and you have, special plates that I only bring out when I entertain, and you just have these things. And I'd grown up that way. And I still don't think anything's wrong with it. It's hard being so downsized, but it's really friggin' awesome.
Totally.
And my philosophy is not that I'm doing something not everybody can do. Everybody's doing their own thing. I'm always, when we used to be able to say left of center, and it used to mean a little odd. And now when we say it, it kind of means the left and the right. And I don't necessarily mean that. I just mean that I'm all my life, from growing up in foster care and, having unconventional jobs and just living a little differently, I'm not necessarily in the same line as everyone else. And I worked in a corporate job for like 12 years. I got adult jobs when I turned 30. And so I worked in a corporate job for about 12 years, and I was struggling to be in the same line as everyone else. And I had the wardrobe, and I had the apartment, and I had the friends that fit into what you would do these air quotes and say, perfect corporate, excuse me, the perfect corporate life. And getting out of that, things changed, and it is so much easier now to not, to not have to worry about that stuff.
Totally. I can relate. So, same thing in the military, you don't have a lot of things. You live in a teeny tiny space, and a lot of times you share that same space with someone else. So, for example, my very first station, I had a roommate, and we had bunk beds, and we could keep them as bunk beds, or we could lay them flat. Like they didn't care what we did. They're like, here's your stuff. You each have a bed. You each have a locker. Everything has, and this, your room, like, I think it was probably like, maybe, I don't even know how many square feet it was, but it was teeny tiny. And you shared the bathroom with 2 other girls on the other side. So 4 girls sharing one bathroom, one teeny ass tiny bathroom. And then you have a teeny tiny room that you share. And the only time you ever were by yourself was if you were a certain age, if you were a certain rank.
If you were pooping.
Well, yes. And or if you were married, right? So you didn't live in this dorm environment. So we lived in dorms. And so my first dorm, same thing. I had a roommate. My second dorm, I had a roommate. My third dorm, the only reason I didn't have a roommate was because I joined the military a little bit later. So my third station, I didn't have a roommate. I actually had the whole room to myself, which was crazy because it felt huge. Because
I can imagine.
I didn't have to share it with someone. And it literally was probably like, I don't know, maybe 10 by 10. It was a 10 by 10 room, and it just felt huge because I got all of it. The whole space was mine. And so I guess maybe to me, because I had these experiences, like, I don't need like a 5,000 square foot house. Like, that to me just sounds crazy. Like, let alone, it took me 2 hours to clean from top to bottom, like white glove clean my space. 2 hours. How many people can say it takes 2 hours to clean your space?
I got you beat, but I won't say.
Well, yes, but in general, like,
but
most of us,
for house people that live in big houses, yeah, or you just don't clean because you've got a family and you don't have time to get back there and do all the baseboards.
Exactly.
Or you have somebody who does it.
Exactly. Or you spread it amongst the family. In regard to living on a boat, do you and your husband have any sailor superstitions?
So there's a superstition about bringing bananas on board.
Okay.
And I think it originated with the boats that brought bananas from warm locations because there's banana spiders and
Yeah.
they're big. Yeah. And so I think that was what it was originally. Some sailors don't allow bananas if you're out at sea. I mean, we just lived there. And so it's really hard to take your house out. So we didn't really have a lot of superstitions because we weren't out sailing. We have a lovely marina and we go to work. And, if you think about all the things that you need to do. So when you're going to go sailing, your boat rolls from side to side. So nothing can be sitting out. Like if you have a microwave on your table, it's going to end up on the floor.
Yep.
So you have to stow everything away, which means that liveaboard people don't go out for just a couple hours. Liveaboard people, if they go out for the weekend, that weekend is going to be 5 days long. It's the people that don't live aboard that take little weekend trips. And this is not across the board, but for the most part. But we didn't really have any superstitions. I had bananas on board all the time for smoothies. No, I'm gonna have to ask my husband that actually and see what he can think of. He's sailed around the world, and I'm sure that he has some stories about captains that he's sailed under who are like, oh, you have to do this. I mean, there's safety things.
Of course.
But those are not weird superstitions. So no, I can't think of any actually.
I am fascinated. I, at one time, wanted to live on a houseboat like the ones in Seattle. The ones, of course, that were made famous by the movie Sleepless in Seattle. After I became a widow, I was looking for anything to help me change my life, right?
Oh, yeah,
so
completely.
I was in Orange County, suburbia, and I didn't know what to do until I was like, you know what? I think living on a houseboat in Seattle sounds awesome. So I started looking into that like a crazy person. And then I realized, I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of work that goes into that. And I don't know if I'm cut out for that. But that kind of spiraled into, well, what if I was on a boat, like a real boat, not like a house boat, but like a real boat? And then I was like, oh, that would be a great thing to do, to ride on a boat. Like, how cool is that? Especially because I love the sound of the water, like everything about it sounds very romantic. And in my head, I'm like, that sounds really cool. I'm like, I think it's really cool for the people who live on boats, who experience this world that the rest of us that are tethered, here, and we have houses. And so in my mind, it's a very romantic thing.
So it is a lifestyle change, and it saves you money, and it allows you. So when you downsize, you don't just randomly get rid of your stuff. You save your favorites. So you are surrounded by your favorite things.
Oh yeah. And to bring it full circle. So again, I don't sail. I have mad respect for sailors. So this is going to blow your mind. So, like I said, I became a widow. I didn't know if I would ever find love again. I didn't know what my life would be. Fast forward 1 year later, I ended up meeting Brandy, who is my happily ever after, who is a sailor.
Oh my God.
She sails boats. So when you were talking about the song, I'm like, I had never heard of the song until I met her. And then that song came on, and it was really funny because I was like, what is it? And she was like, it's my song. And I was like, what do you mean it's my song? And she was like, do you not hear the lyrics? And I was like, oh, hey, oh. And so it's so funny because, like I said, I may not be a sailor.
But she is.
I'm like, that's who I'm with. So how crazy is that? So
that's super cool.
Full circle, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I really appreciate the stories to bring it back full circle to your stories.
You know, a lot of times something in us just can't get there, and that's baggage that we carry around. But in my stories, I wanted those women to get there.
Absolutely. So what are you, I see your awesome leopard mug there. Is that, what kind of tea is that?
So funny, it's throat coat. Ever since COVID, I'm like joking sometimes. So I don't sweeten it, and I stopped putting sweetener in my coffee. I started doing intermittent fasting, and so you can't break the fast with sweeteners. And then I started thinking about all the drinks that we have, not like milk and water, but everything else. We kind of have this expectation that our drink is going to be sweet. When we think about coffee, tea, sodas, iced tea, juices. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. So it's been really interesting to not drink sweetened things. It's like a new thing I'm doing.
Tea is the one thing I actually don't necessarily put sugar in. I will put just a splash of cream in it just to change the color. But
Yeah.
I don't need cream, or I don't need sugar in it, which is crazy.
You know, for black tea, Earl Grey and stuff, excuse me, I kind of do. But herbal tea,
Oh,
not
yeah.
at all.
No, herbal tea, it's flowers. It's already like, it's nature's
Yeah.
candy. It's nature's,
Yeah.
it's naturally sweet. Like chamomile, I love chamomile. Like if I'm gonna have some chamomile tea, now does it taste a little bit better with some honey in it? Yes.
Yeah.
But I can get away with drinking chamomile tea or chai without sugar. I don't need to add any of that stuff to it.
Same.
Miss TJ Butler, we have talked about all kinds of crazy, silly things. Is there anything from your book that we did not talk about that you wanted to share, that you want to let the listeners know?
I think actually I covered everything. I'm not accustomed to talking about my book, and really I'm a writer, not a salesperson. The only thing that I would say that I've learned through book marketing is not necessarily for myself, but readers in general. If you like a book, it is free to leave a review on Goodreads for any author, be it, you know, someone famous or somebody not so famous. I've learned that, you know, books are this art that we create, and this kind of a wild ride that you can give a reader. And, you know, I will never see most of the people that read my book, but I'm hoping that they kind of went on a little bit of a journey. And if anybody out in listening land does end up with my book, I hope that you see your badass self in my stories. And if any of my stories touch you, I hope that you find a way to change your trauma narrative so that you have a little bit of badassery.
That's like the perfect way to like end the show. Like on that note, like we can't even top that. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you for hanging out. Thank you for sharing your book baby with us and telling us these awesome stories. And I couldn't agree more about changing the trauma narrative. Like that is something so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your time with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
Would you send us off with my tagline of go forth and be magical?
Oh my gosh, that's the best thing ever. So everybody who has listened to this, please go forth and be magical.